From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Welcome back. Our guest today is Alexander Hefner, host of The Open Mind on PBS. Welcome, Alexander. And on that note, we will get to our first issue. Issue 1, the 9th seat.
Anthony Kennedy has been a Supreme Court justice for more than 30 years, but at the end of July, he will retire. Conservatives are celebrating. They see Kennedy's departure as an opportunity for President Trump to nominate a more conservative jurist to the court. But liberals fear that Kennedy's replacement may roll back legal protections on issues such as abortion and gay marriage.
Pat, what should Trump look for in his nominee, and how will this affect the culture of the nation?
He's going to look for a Federalist Society selection, and he's got 25 of them, and I understand it's down to about 5. But you know, this is important historically. The Great Warren Revolution and the revolution in the 40s and 50s de-Christianized America, imposed a revolution on the country in terms of abortion and gay rights being constitutional rights, all of that. That revolution is over, but that does not necessarily portend a rollback to the 50s. But I do think you've got now a conservative court, and I do think
is Roe v. Wade over?
Roe v. Wade is, what's going to happen is people are going to come into the Supreme Court with restrictions on abortion, and people who invoke Roe and say you can't do that are going to be defeated once this goes through. But look, this is going to be the bloodiest battle you can imagine. Both parties are going to unite and fight this to the death right up into the fall. So I think it's going to go right into this election.
Eleanor.
You know, you use the phrase de-Christianize America. I didn't see that necessarily as the role of the Supreme Court. This country was founded on a separation of religion from the state, and we don't have prayer in the schools anymore. But I don't think the new justice will be the 9th vote for bringing, or will be a vote for restoring prayer in the schools, although the other issues that you've cited are very much under threat. I think Roe v. Wade, probably abortion rights gets kicked back to the states.
Do you share Pat's perspective that it will weaponize, that the Democrats will really come out and say no?
I'm working up to that, Tom. Give me time. The president has already invited the 2 pro-choice Republican women to the White House, together with the 3 Democratic senators who voted for Gorsuch, red state senators. He's looking for somebody that they can all support. So I think he would like to do this without too much blood on the floor. But the Democrats have to fight. They have a terrible hand. There's no way to sugarcoat this for the Democrats. But they've got to be willing to fight even if they lose, because it is about setting up midterms and the energy for the midterms.
Alexander.
It's about Roe. It's also about the equilibrium on the court. And that's why it's surprising that Justice Kennedy did retire during the Trump administration. There is a personal connection, but beyond that, we ought to be concerned with a consensus nominee because it's in the best interest of this country to have a unifying moment. We're in desperate need of a unifying moment. Says the American people, overwhelmingly, who favor Roe.
We'll see that in November.
Who favor even Republicans who favor Roe.
I agree with you, and I think if the president could find someone that could get the votes of those 5 senators he brought to the White House, he'd have a winner.
Clarence.
Yeah, I only just disagree in terms of whether this will be a fight to the death. I think it's going to be a fight to the fizzle. Democrats have no power. They're like a dead battery right now. They do need to talk. They need to organize. They need to work up the grassroots, and they're working on that. And we will see in November.
You saw what happened.
But you know, what can they do to block this?
But you saw what happened to Clarence
right
Thomas. You saw what happened to Bork.
Well,
that is what is coming.
In both cases, well, you mentioned the magic word Bork, which is now a word in the dictionary. Where does that come from? It comes from digging up dirt on an appointee so you can block them. So we will see what happens when the new jurist is, or rather the new candidate.
Wait, Alexander, let me ask you: who do you think would be a candidate who could attract support from both sides? Do you have a name?
Perhaps someone in the chamber. Right. But I think that Senator Lee would give the president an edge in persuading Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski.
But you know, those 5 people, Murkowski and Susan Collins, and the 3 Democrats, Heidkamp and Joe Gallagher, I guess it is.
No, Joe Manchin, Heidi Heidkamp.
All you need one of them because they got 51 votes.
But not one of them if there's a scandal.
A name, Eleanor. Merrick Garland.
Name? Oh, he's not going to appoint Merrick Garland. Brett Kavanaugh is supposed to be a head of the pack. But he has said a sitting president can't be indicted. There's a conflict of interest here.
Right.
So Democrats can fight along those lines, and they can try to hold off a vote until after the midterms. It's a slim chance, but McConnell held off a vote. 10 months was left in President Obama's term. There's 4 months until we have an election here. There are going to be senators who are going to be gone. Should they be having a vote? So I think there's a legitimate argument to wait after the midterms.
Wait, Pat Clarence, a name quickly.
Okay, a name, Judge Janine from Fox News. Obviously, she's top on Trump's mind. But the fact is, Mitch McConnell doesn't mind fighting dirty. That was a dirty thing they did with that appointment, and they won.
Even
and
if
we're
you
going to
didn't
see
get
more
it,
dirty
you'd have a
politics
lame
going on.
duck session, they would get a justice
We have a
in.
similar issue coming up.
Fine.
We're going to go on to the next one and continue
there's
this
a
wonderful
chance
conversation.
the Democrats
Issue
could take
2,
the Senate.
bans and
Chance.
dues.
The Supreme Court delivered big wins for Republicans this week when it ruled on 2 landmark cases. First up was the court's decision to uphold President Trump's travel ban on those wishing to travel to the United States from a number of Muslim-majority nations. Next came the ruling in Janus versus American Federation of State, County and Municipal Employees that prevents individuals from being compelled to pay union dues if they are not a union member.
Eleanor, continuing with that energy, what does this mean for the...
First, on the travel ban, I think that ranks up there with the Dred Scott decision as something that leaves a stain on this country. And the fact that they would overturn the Korematsu decision to put Japanese in camps during World War II, to choose that vehicle is an insult there too. And on the unions, we knew that was coming. And the unions are preparing. And you look at the culinary workers out in Las Vegas, there's no requirement that they have to pay dues. 95% of them do because they see that they're getting value. So the unions are going to have to face up to this. But I do think this is a foreshadowing of a court that's going to be even more sympathetic to corporate power at a time when we need to strengthen the working man and lessen the distance between the elites, the corporate elites, and regular people.
The most powerful element of the Democratic Party is these public service unions. I mean, AFSCME and the others. And you can't even require them to pay dues for negotiating a contract. Lots of people, as happened out in Wisconsin, people are just going to drop out. Dues are expensive, $500 to $1,000. People aren't going to pay them.
The question is, what are you getting for your dues? That's the question.
Exactly.
And a lot of people are organizing these days because working people feel like they're getting shafted, and that's what really matters.
Clarence, I know they had the clothes shop. They outlawed that. The union shop, to which I belonged in St. Louis, in the newspaper, that's gone. But now the agency shop, I will say, this surprises me.
Well, my newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, just organized the union in their newsroom. So did the L.A. Times. I mean, this is a movement that's happening now with a big revival.
Voluntary.
Colonel McCormick's old newspaper.
This was
Very
to
quickly.
pay dues for collective bargaining. So what about the free riders? So they get the benefits of the collective bargaining? That's not fair either.
That's what the court said.
I don't
Wait. All right.
Alexander.
Alexander.
The unitary executive, we have to be really watchful because this court seems to be sympathetic with the argument that the President of the United States can do anything he damn well pleases.
And do you think the Supreme Court will be a checking influence on the President in the next year?
Possibly Chief Justice Roberts. Maybe, he said, we'll give him the travel ban.
And let me ask you about this. How
Yes.
do you read the travel ban?
Well, I don't think it was argued most competitively, and what I mean by that is look at the political implications of the travel ban. Look at the countries that sent the hijackers here. Look at the countries where there are Trump properties. There could have been a more strategic argument against the ban.
Of bias.
But look, you got 45 Muslim countries that are not included here. You got 5, I believe, that are. I mean, quite clearly, this is a presidential power, and he exercised it, and so the court chose not to regard what he'd been saying during the campaign, which was the right thing to do.
But is it being exploited for his personal benefit and not the security of this nation?
It shows the court's deference to executive power, and with what could be coming down the pike for this president, that's a very worrisome sign.
But the the laws protecting the border historically belong to the President of the United States.
Well, they deliberately avoided all of his comments, which were clearly biased and racially biased.
Well, they said, though,
they
that it
completely
matters.
ignored that because it's not about this president, it's about the president.
And they almost
It's
they admitted, they
it's
conceded
a distinction without a
that
difference.
there is executive authority, and that executive authority can be enacted unconstitutionally.
This bothers
It
me.
can also
Look,
be-
Eleanor Korematsu is under FDR, and the chief promoter of it was
it was
Governor
awful.
Earl Warren of California.
It was awful. I'm not excusing that. I'm saying, but if you're going to
When you say
overturn
this
it,
president,
if
what
you-
did he do?
I said if you're going to overturn it 4 decades later in the context of this decision, it's kind of insulting.
Yeah,
It's
and
not
I-
a liberating
Concluding comment.
This president said he was doing this for national security reasons. Yet, as you mentioned, Saudi Arabia, where most of the hijackers
Oh,
came
you
from,
mean,
is
are you
on
just
the
going to
list.
rewrite
So,
the immigration law?
let Clarence finish.
Are we going to let the Supreme Court direct, micromanage our national security in a matter that's so inconsistent here? And the answer is yes, because they've got
All
the
right.
power
The
right
Supreme
now.
Court-
And
All
they can
right,
stop it.
Pat, be quiet. You're going to like this next issue. We're going on. Issue 3, the Sultan, S-400, and some sanctions.
Winning re-election last weekend, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is feeling good, just not in his relations with the United States. The US Senate is furious over Erdogan's purchase of an advanced Russian air defense system, the S-400. Senators say that NATO member Turkey should not be allowed to continue buying the American-made F-35 fighter jet if it also buys the S-400. The senators fear that the F-35's advanced technology might fall into Russian hands. That speaks to a broader concern, determined to build a neo-Ottoman empire with himself as effective Sultan. Erdogan has aligned himself with President Vladimir Putin of Russia. Testifying to Congress this week, the Trump administration predicted U.S. sanctions on Turkey if it takes possession of the S-400.
Pat, should Erdogan be sanctioned? Is he a US ally?
Back in 1956, Nasser was sanctioned. We wouldn't build the Aswan Dam. You recall that?
What
And
happened with that?
Exactly. Had a war, and then
Tom wasn't
Egypt
born yet,
wound
Pat.
up. Egypt wound up for 15 years in the camp of the Soviet Empire. Look, Turkey. Erdogan is a real problem, but Turkey is a vital asset of this country. It's strategic in NATO, second largest army in NATO. Erdogan is pushing against the Kurds. He's doing things we don't want. But for us, I think to sanction him and not send the F-35 would be to drop ourselves out of the game, and I think it would be the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, I think the senators would like to sanction him, but I'm not sure President Trump will go along. He's going to be meeting with Putin, where they're going to be talking about world affairs and world peace, among other things. A deal he thinks he has with the Russians in Syria, and I imagine this might come up too in the little triumvirate of dictators there. I don't know that President will be willing to take on both
Trump is
Erdogan
democratically
and
elected.
Putin. But he's definitely authoritarian.
But we have a constitution that checks him.
Right,
You
I mean,
hope.
we have this strange situation where we live under a minoritarian rule here with the Electoral College, and these dictators actually, if the votes were rigged, then unjustifiably are ruling, but Erdogan did get
Or
over
should he be
50%.
sanctioned, though?
He should be sanctioned. He should be sanctioned. At a minimum, we should acknowledge that Trump has a love affair with dictators. To what end? To
And
what end?
He's not embarrassed by it. He's simply rather proud of it, and he also gets into spats with our traditional allies in NATO. I mean, Erdogan's playing us beautifully. I remember the old days when you really had Russia was bidding against the U.S. for Turkey's favor. Now Turkey gets whatever they want with a president on our side who seems to admire that kind
But
of
you
authoritarian
talk
rule.
about authoritarians. Our friends in Egypt are authoritarian, not only the Turks, Xi Jinping, authoritarian,
We have a
Duterte
long
in the
tradition, don't
Philippines.
we?
Triumph.
All of
Long
these guys,
tradition.
are we going to be not talk to people because they're autocratic?
Pat, there
You
are other
can't
options.
talk to half the world.
There are other options besides not talking at all or
Right.
giving in entirely. There's a lot in the middle there that we're not dealing with.
Yeah, we're talking about sanctions, not talking. So,
Right.
So you could destroy the relationship with Turkey by doing this now. Now, maybe you want to do that, but I don't think we ought to take the risk.
We ought to at least have the leverage, though. If they
You
know
got
we're
the
going to
leverage,
give them whatever
don't
they want, you
exercise
got no
it.
leverage at all, right?
Eleanor,
We
though,
are.
isn't there the argument that could be made that President Trump here is simply dealing with the dividend given to him by his predecessor, in the sense that these relationships were allowed to decline? Erdogan separated himself from the United States under Obama.
it seems to me that his apparent overriding desire to do something nice for Putin goes beyond just contradicting another thing that President
But
Obama
he did bomb them in Syria.
That was not much of a bomb.
Yeah, right.
200 of them were killed, the Russians.
They were
Well,
contractors.
Yeah.
They were GRU, Pat, come on.
The Russians did not make a great stink about it. Look, if the
Right.
Russians want to try to get along with us,
All right.
why not?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean,
Well,
but
be
the argument
cautious.
is interests.
Trust but verify,
Yeah,
right, Pat?
yeah.
You've heard that before.
Putin's overriding goal is to divide Europe, and
The Europeans
Trump is
are doing a
helping
good
him.
job of that themselves.
Well, I don't.
Alexander.
This president is relying on bilateral discussions. I know Pat's not going to want to hear it, but we do live in a global society today.
Oh,
Do we,
G
Pat?
Isn't that amazing?
All right. Okay.
The G word.
All right, we will, when we come back, progressive revolutionaries and a mobilization you haven't heard about. Over the next minute or so, log on to Twitter and follow us at McLaughlin Group. And if you feel like it, visit our webpage, mclaughlin.com.
The McLaughlin Group is brought to you in part by Eric.org. Is your company trying to provide health and retirement benefits to workers across the country? The ERISA Industry Committee beats back taxes, mandates, and compliance burdens that make it harder for companies to provide employee benefits. Learn how Eric supports large employers at Eric.org.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
Issue 4, Millennial Revolution.
I'm an educator, an organizer, a working-class New Yorker.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez upended the Democratic Party this week when she won a primary election against 10-term Democratic Congressman Joe Crowley. 28-year-old Ocasio-Cortez is now almost certain to win election to Congress this November as the representative for New York's 14th Congressional District. But while some Democrats are celebrating, others are worried that Ocasio-Cortez's victory may shift the party further to the left and jeopardize its general election viability. After all, Ocasio-Cortez is a democratic socialist who believes in Medicare for all, free tuition for all, and a federal jobs guarantee for all. Oh, and a green energy mandate.
Clarence, is this the great revolutionary saving the day of the Democratic Party, or is this someone throwing the party off the cliff?
What this really causes in the Democratic Party is concern about unity. It's not a question of moving too far to the left or too far to the middle. It's a question of keeping themselves together because they already have shown a localized approach to these congressional races. Obviously, running in the South Bronx, as in Crowley's example, is not the same as running in Alabama, but there are ways to win in both, and that's what the party's doing. The big lesson of Crowley's race is keep in touch with your districts.
Yeah, right.
Know what's going on. The demographics have changed. Obviously, his party machine has crumbled more than he realized until it was too late, and that's something every politician has to watch out for.
Good analysis.
His people say that the poll showed him 36 points ahead 3 weeks before. He skips 2 debates. To one debate, he sends a young Hispanic woman, which was as his representative, which was seen as condescending. So he lost touch. He's a very congenial guy, and he sang Born to Run, dedicated to her when it became clear he had lost. I grew up in Queens, in Jackson Heights. I'm not sure it's actually part of this district, but when Crowley won that seat 20 years ago, it was 58% white, is now 75% immigrants, and mostly people of color. So, and her message was clear: Medicare for all and dismantle ISIS. Now that was a new ICE. Well, it could slip of the tongue, but maybe it's meaningful.
In that neighborhood, it's like ISIS.
That's right.
That's kind of a stretch to say ISIS is ISIS.
That's a powerful message because look at all the demonstrations going on in Washington on Saturday against family separation.
Yesterday,
this is a big issue.
It is indeed, but look, they had 13% turnout in that district. Other districts in New York had 9% turnouts, small turnouts. Democratic Party is becoming a majority-minority party. Latinos and African Americans and Asians are becoming majority. She ran, Crowley said she raised the issue of race. This is tremendously dramatic for the party. It's not going to push, but it is going to pull the party. And you mentioned the immigration ICE. This is going to be a blazing issue this coming fall, the campaign to basically shut down ICE. Already de Blasio has endorsed it. Gillibrand,
Does it help
the
Trump,
senator.
do you think?
Oh, it's going to get, Trump, if I were Trump, I would make this issue. They're going to shut down the immigration agency, which runs down criminals in the United States.
All right, Alexander.
She's a New Deal Democrat. The Democratic Socialist label is not one that Democrats should embrace. They should embrace New Deal Democrats, revive that moniker, because that was successful, 4 terms.
Do you think Democrats have a concern in the sense of how much all this would cost?
Not at the moment. I don't think there's a concern because it's about vision. And
Right.
it was, her victory is important because of what it demonstrates, a visual re-examination,
How
charisma.
long did that New Deal
vigor.
coalition work?
Well, it worked through Johnson, and you know,
In
then
other
it went
words,
up
it
in
was
flames.
dead 50 years ago.
Oh, well,
Yeah,
but we
well,
can't get
the-
entitlement
we-
reform, can
we
we?
need-
quite.
we need a
Nixon
new
and Agnew
guard.
smashed it.
We need a new
Well,
guard.
yeah, but
Alex-
look at Nixon's agenda.
A new guard presentation-wise. New faces,
All right.
Yeah.
championing those values.
Yeah, they need.
I'm just going to say
Those are
Nixon's
timeless,
agenda-
indelible values.
Nixon's agenda was basically New Deal domestically. He would like the foreign affairs. But you're right. As far as Reagan, certainly that was the end, the beginning of the end for the New Deal coalition.
Yeah, but
Economic
the
security is
Democrats
not
need an
socialism.
aspirational vision,
Yep.
and they also need to be seen as fighters. They don't have either right now.
But I will say
there's
she's
still
a
time.
look, I saw her when she won. She's very charismatic, very attractive, but just too entirely far left to the degree
Oh,
the Democratic Party
You
moves
know,
there. Okay,
young
I-
people
Concluding comment,
young-
Eleanor.
I applaud her
young people
victory,
Eleanor.
Young people today are majority minority. The country is headed in that direction.
Right.
She is far more in touch with the rising American electorate than Donald Trump is.
But Crowley is more of
Right.
a kind of candidate who could win nationally
All
than
right,
she
all
is.
right.
Yeah, but he's not
We're
running
moving on.
nationally.
We're moving on. Issue 5, Macron's mobilization.
Mobilizing a grand armée of sorts. President Emmanuel Macron of France this week announced a national service plan for all French 16-year-olds. Divided into 2 stages, the service requirement will last between 4 and 13 months and see teenagers working with the military, police, rescue services, or charities. The multi-billion-dollar effort, the French government says, is necessary to, quote, enable young people to create new relationships and develop their role in society, end quote.
Alexander, do we need a similar national service scheme?
Absolutely. I've been advocating for something of this nature for a long time. The civic apathy is at its height. Folks don't know Brown v. Board of Education. Meanwhile, you have a jurist being nominated for the federal bench who doesn't want to uphold its constitutionality. We need civic education and literacy more than anything else.
Very good. And your
Well,
show is a good example
yeah,
of that.
President Clinton had the National Service bill, which resulted in AmeriCorps, which still exists. Hillary Clinton ran on something called the National Service Reserve, where people could serve part-time in disaster relief and help out in their communities. Problem is, this isn't going anywhere for the foreseeable future. The military doesn't want it, doesn't need it, it's expensive, and that spirit is not alive and well in this
Yeah,
country.
That's also
the
true.
country's too divided to have something like this
Yeah.
personally done by the state. But look, my old high school and other high schools and schools, they got programs where kids are going into the inner city, they're taking weeks off, they're getting credits for these things. There's all kinds of social organizations that do these are the groups that ought to be conscripting volunteers who go and do it, who want to do it. But
So
the idea of
it's-
the state imposing it, no.
Certainly true. As a draftee myself, I'm part of this generation that didn't want to go into the military, but now that I have, I see the value of it, and I wish my son would do it because you do learn how to deal with what we talk about, the division and tribalism that's reemerging in America right now. Part of the reason is we don't have institutions like the draft that brought kids in from different parts of the country and really got
Let me
a
ask
little
you
work with each other.
a follow-up question. I mean, how many, do you think there is a sort of issue that perhaps not enough? I mean, we do see Terry McAuliffe's son, I believe, is in the military, but you know, there seem to be, I don't know how many liberals in your position would say that, you know, that they would send their kids
Or-
into the
We
military.
Or conservatives, for that matter.
We have many members of Congress now who are veterans. We have a whole group of Democrats, former veterans who are running. I think that absence of the military from public service, that's over. You have
And
you have
service
They're
has an
all
expansive
volunteers.
definition.
They're all
Right.
volunteers now,
Right.
which is a good, not conscripts.
And,
Right.
and let me ask
the
one other
draft
question here.
doesn't exist, obviously. Right.
Does anyone here, though, think that Macron's choice as a sort of centre-leftist to set up this national service military focus is a kind of endorsement of what Pat is saying about the breakdown of the national
Well,
spirit?
he's the first French president not to have served. So I think he's trying to do his penance here, and I think he probably realizes what he misses, what he
But it's-
missed.
the
And, you know,
mandatory,
Bill
as I
Clinton was
understand
the
it-
first American president not to have served.
But it's, I
and
think it's,
he did the
I
same
think
thing.
I think it's 1 month, isn't it, in France, and then options to go for 3 months.
3 to
and then
13.
13. It doesn't sound like, you know, some of my uncles in World War II spent
Well,
4
one problem
years in
is,
there.
is youth unemployment in France because people don't want to retire and try to do something for the young people there.
From the American perspective, millennials demonstrated the failure or the limitations of volunteerism.
All right, when we will be right back with predictions.
For more than a century, the Greater Washington Board of Trade has focused on growing our regional economy. We work every day to foster collaboration, build pipelines for skilled workers, embrace innovation, and attract investment. We must think, plan, and act as a region to better leverage our shared assets so we can continue shaping and advancing a vibrant regional economy for the next 100 years.
Predictions, Pat.
As mentioned, ICE, the move to abolish ICE is going to be a blazing issue coming on this summer, but also this fall, and I think Trump will pick it up. And the whole immigration issue, I think it's going to be the #1 issue now in the fall.
Interesting, Eleanor.
There will be more scrutiny, and there should be more scrutiny on the relationship between Justin Kennedy and Donald Trump, because Kennedy headed the real estate division at Deutsche Bank and worked directly with Donald Trump, lending billions of dollars to Trump at a time when no American banks would lend him any money.
Alexander.
We're anticipating the Obama's memoirs, both the First Lady and the President, and I think you'll see in the President's real regret over the Garland situation, but more specifically, Jane Kelly. Jane Kelly should have been the nominee, and they should have camped outside of Chairman Grassley's house in Iowa.
Okay, Clarence.
I'm predicting the Democrats, in order to have an effective leadership voice, they've got to have a nominee, and that's been a big problem up until now, finding someone to really counter the Republicans on that score, and that will determine whether or not they go to the left or to the center.
Okay. I predict that England will win the Soccer World Cup. It's a good analytical assessment. And here's a random fact. 21 years ago today, Britain transferred sovereignty over Hong Kong to China. In return, China committed to respect the capitalist culture of Hong Kong. And under President Xi Jinping, Hong Kong has now faced increasing control from Beijing. So that deal didn't really work out for the British. Anyway, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.